Before we start the panel, I'd like to introduce Dr. Suzanne Teran. Suzanne Teran is the Associate Director of the Labor Occupational Health Program at UC Berkeley, where much of her career has focused on addressing immigrant workers' health and safety and developing effective strategies to improve working conditions. Her current work includes facilitating the State Advisory Committee that developed guidelines and policy recommendations to protect household service workers, and also conducting research to better understand occupational chemical exposures among domestic workers, hotel housekeepers, and janitors, among other projects. So Suzanne, do you want to introduce your panelists?
Yes, thank you so much, Christina, and good morning, everybody. Happy to be here with you this morning. And as mentioned, we're going to continue the conversation on the low-wage worker sector, and I'll be facilitating the panel. And we're very fortunate to have panelists here who work in or with workers in rideshare, fast food, domestic work, and day labor. And they'll be sharing some of their experiences with us today. As the panels did yesterday, they will describe some of the key changes and issues that come to mind in their sector, some of the work that has been happening in terms of organizing and policy campaigns, and a call to action for future work. And actually, I'm going to start by introducing Deysi. So, bienvenida, Deysi, al panel. Deysi Gomez works with the California Fast Food Workers Union and is also a crew member at McDonald's. Deysi immigrated to the United States from Guatemala 2 years ago, and she works here to support herself as well as her family in Guatemala, where she has her 6-year-old daughter. Deysi first spoke up at work after being forced to work at the McDonald's through a power outage, where she had to use her iPhone flashlight to make food and take orders manually through the drive-through. She also then spoke up about her experience in front of the San Jose City Council, and that led to her strike. And currently, she's struggling with management as they are pushing her to quit because she has filed a complaint against them. So we're fortunate to have Deysi come and share her experience today. Our second panelist is Nancy Zuniga. And Nancy is the director of the Workers' Health Program at IDEPSCA, which is the Institute of Popular Education of Southern California. IDEPSCA is a multi-issue worker center based in Los Angeles that organizes with day laborers, domestic workers, and other immigrant low-wage workers. There, Nancy leads the organization's climate justice and occupational health work, which includes outreach and education with workers, as well as policy advocacy to address gaps in health and safety protections for immigrant workers. Nancy has served on multiple advisory committees, including very recently, the SB 321 Domestic Worker Health and Safety Advisory Committee, which created the first voluntary health and safety guidelines for household workers in California. So welcome, Nancy. In addition, we're going to have Nicole Moore. And Nicole is president of Rideshare Drivers United. Welcome, Nicole. And Nicole is a part-time app driver in Los Angeles. And as part of Rideshare Drivers United, they are an independent organization of drivers run by drivers. It was founded in 2018 and has become a powerful force advocating for full labor rights for app-based drivers and dignity for all workers, no matter how they are deployed, whether by human managers or AI. I love that introduction, Nicole. And also joining us is going to be Dr. Gould-Werth. So thank you for coming back and being part of the panel. And thank you for that context you provided and then lending that to the conversation that we're going to be having in the next hour. So we'll start, and we'll start with just a few questions. If you could first just share a little bit about your job or the workers that you work with, and some reflections on what has changed over the years or some of the key issues or concerns that you're hearing about from workers. What are some of the important challenges that you see workers are facing? And why don't we start with you, Nancy?
Sure. Thanks so much for having me. It's an honor to be part of this conversation. an important conversation. So at IDEPSCA, I focus mostly on, as was mentioned, the the health and safety of workers, mostly immigrant day laborers and domestic workers. And by day laborers, we're referring to mostly Latino immigrant men, mostly monolingual speaking immigrants, some that have been in this country for over 30 years, and other more recent migrants, some that are indigenous to the Americas, speaking other languages other than Spanish as their first language. And these are folks that do construction work, gardening, cleanup, even warehouse work. In some of our day labor centers, they even do some warehouse work in the fashion district. And when I speak about domestic workers, I'm referring to nannies, babysitters, house cleaners, caregivers. It's a really wide range. So mostly what I focus on is doing in-person outreach with my team. We do creation of targeted educational materials because unfortunately, even when there's materials available, let's say for, the Latino communities, let's say, they're not specifically targeted towards the needs of domestic workers and day laborers. We also have health and safety committees where we meet monthly with day laborers and we speak on some of the issues going on at their jobs, specifically in construction, in gardening, and in warehouse work. We also have a virtual health and safety committee with domestic workers where we talk about, for example, the voluntary guidelines that we were part of helping create. And we are constantly talking about what does it look like on the ground to be excluded from health and safety protections. Most people might not know that domestic work, which includes gardeners, are excluded from CalOSHA protections, which leaves a huge gap for workers, most that don't have access to health insurance, having injuries that are very easily preventable. So a lot of my work really is in advocacy, is in education, is really learning from workers. What does their day-to-day look like? Looking for work outside of Home Depots or other types of stores of this nature, and just really what are ways that we can organize around these issues.
Thank you, Nancy. I'm curious when you're like some of the issues that you're mentioning that you said you hear about from the workers when you have those meetings. Can you name a couple of the top things that are on their minds?
Sure. So it's a wide range. For us or for myself and the health team, health and safety is kind of a entry point to talk about other labor violations. Our organization also supports workers with, things like wage theft, which is rampant in Los Angeles in particular. They consider it the wage theft capital, unfortunately. And a lot of that wage theft happens to day laborers and domestic workers where they will work a full day and it sounds almost unbelievable, but they will not get paid, or they will not get paid the full hours that they were, they had agreed with the employer. And so when we talk about health and safety, we go over some of the basics, how do you identify hazards at a workplace when you enter someone's home, when you enter a construction site? What are things that you need to look out for? Are the things that are not, that are misplaced or in the way? Falls, very preventable falls happen often both for day laborers and domestic workers. There's also a lot of ergonomic hazards in both for day laborers and domestic workers. We often hear of workers, going to work in pain, in a lot of pain. And so we talk about how can those things be prevented. Unfortunately, it ends up falling mostly on our organizations and on workers to be able to identify these hazards and then really try to have and negotiate with their employer about how to correct these hazards. And so one of the things that we talk about in our health and safety committee committees is how do we learn to negotiate not just our wages, but also our health and safety. But again, the same things that come up in negotiations around wages also comes up in health and safety. Workers are afraid that they will not get employed again, especially in the case of workers that are working day by day. They're afraid that they won't get hired again, that they'll get let go. And they often share that employers tell them, I can find another one of you. So the view or the notion that these workers are easily disposable and replaceable is something that is a reality, and that we're constantly trying to work with workers on how they can organize themselves and really share all the knowledge they have about the work itself and all the skills they have. Because another notion that we're constantly pushing back on is the idea that domestic work and day labor work or manual labor is unskilled labor. That is just completely not true. And so this is something that we're constantly talking with workers about. How do we fight that, or how to, what are talking points that can help them. Even in their limited English, we also incorporate some ESL, some negotiation ESL into our health and safety committee meetings.
Thank you. So Nicole, now I'll give you a chance to talk a little bit about what you're seeing as some of the main changes or concerns and challenges with rideshare workers.
Yeah, so I'm a healthcare worker in my day job, and I do app work after work to try to fill the gap that our regular pay is with our housing costs in most of California. And so I'm like a lot of people, and I'm a part-time driver. So there's many people that rely on app work as their full-time primary income, and the majority of rides given are given by full-time drivers. So it's a very diverse workforce, and I mean, I got started because of housing issues, and what I asked friends who had started driving for other reasons and said, what can you make, like, is it safe? Can I make a lot of money? What is it? And I was told, most of my friends who had been doing the work said, oh, you can make $300 in a night, and you can do really well on some of the big event nights and blah blah blah. And I was like, well, let me try it. So what I found was that the work is you get into a routine, and it can be fun and all those things. And I found that I wasn't able to make 300. By that time, I was able to make about 180 a night if I was lucky. And I saw that kept slipping, especially as I got away from my onboarding, because they give you a lot of incentives at the beginning. And then 3 months into the work, I found that I had to replace all 4 tires on my brand new car. So, that's when you start to figure out that the fleet of these billion-dollar companies are actually belong to middle income and low income people, and they're sitting in our parking places at our apartment buildings or whatever, and they're totally not paying any of those expenses. And the way I mean, literally, some of the drivers I started to get to know, they were making decisions like, what do I do with the $75 that I've just earned? Do I put money in my gas tank, or do I buy a sandwich because I haven't eaten all day, right? And then the minute your transmission goes out or something big happens to your car, you get in this downward spiral. And what's happened is, there was a lot of VC money in the beginning to keep prices really low for passengers and wages really high for drivers. And what's happened is now it's like this, right? It's gone just the other way. It's really super high prices for passengers and really super low for drivers. It's just, we did, you know, the companies represented our job as new. It was, you know, is connecting entrepreneurs with people who wanted to take their ride. They even call it rideshare, right? There's nothing sharing about this. You know, I get in my car and I'm working. I'm not sharing a ride. I'm not trying to get home and taking somebody else with me. I'm trying to earn money. So there's this whole sort of pretend whatever it is. And what it really is that algorithms incentivize our work. You know, they tell us where we can work to make money, when we can work to make money, and they tell us how much we're going to make. And it's not a human being breathing down our neck. It's an algorithm in our phone, right? And because of that, they've been able to sort of convince people, including drivers, that we're somehow independent, and that is in conflict with labor rights or employment rights. And it's not. But what happens is, you know, we even get fired by algorithms, right? And then when we say, well, that didn't actually really happen to, you know, like, no, I wasn't drunk. I've been sober for 30 years. Here's my AA or whatever, right? I wasn't drunk like the passenger reported me. You end up arguing with a chatbot. And it's completely dehumanizing. You've spent, you know, years of your life doing this work, being a professional, good customer service, and because they incentivize passengers to complain by giving them free rides if they complain about their driver, and then it costs us our job. So, hey, deactivation, which is how they fire us by app, and safety are our three biggest issues. And what's happened is, because they've misclassified us as independent contractors, and then they've moved in California to codify misclassification, to basically make it legal to call us independent contractors, when the truth is we are completely under the control of an algorithm boss. We don't have any rights. I get calls from drivers, like at least 3 or 4 drivers a week, who say, can we get unemployment insurance? I was just deactivated. And I said, with Prop 22, those rights went away, right? But our studies, since we can't do anything under Prop 22 doesn't allow us to regulate pay, to do anything except what Prop 22 says. What we decided to spend the last couple of years doing is exposing Prop 22. What we found is that drivers are making, after expenses, and then after the fact that we don't have safety net like unemployment, workers' comp, et cetera. 2 years ago, we were making, netting $6.20 an hour. So under federal minimum wage in California. And that's data from 10,000, you know, consummate professional drivers who do this work full time. 10,000 rights. You know, it's gotten worse since then. The other study that we did was on deactivation and the kind of abuse and instability and just terrifying things that happen because of the app's right to get rid of our work no matter what. And what we found as well is that it's very much tied to the biases in our society, because customers are racist or Islamophobic or whatever. And so our deactivations fall more on the marginalized communities. The third study that we did was on health benefits. Prop 22 promised health benefits. Less than 10% of the workers actually get any kind of healthcare reimbursement. The majority, the biggest chunk of us are actually on Medi-Cal because after expenses, we fall below poverty and are doing Obamacare, right? And what I would say is, it's, and they don't reimburse us for any of that, right? So, and then the majority, the largest group we're much less insured than other Californians, and Latinos are the least insured even in our group, right? So all this stuff basically is codifying the racism and other isms in our society. The majority of my colleagues are people of color and immigrants, right? And so, and what I'm, right now, it's easy to say this is just gig work. It's just side work. Well, it's not for a whole lot of people. And if they're able to codify misclassification for deployment by app, it's coming for every industry. It's just starting here. So we're kind of the canaries in the mine, and we're definitely not able to breathe. And so Rideshare Drivers United, which is the organization that we started in 2018, we're working to overcome Prop 22. It's right now in court. And I know later on we'll talk about some of what we see as solutions.
Thank you, Nicole, and really your testimony and story. I know that we heard from Dr. Gould-Werth in terms of the trends and some of the issues around lack of safety net, the impact of deregulation, and then you're really putting such a personal picture on it. And yeah, thank you. I mean, it is we've been hearing so much about the role of algorithms in so many different industries, but and then in your case, it's so much that direct sort of dehumanizing boss. Thank you for sharing your story, and we will get to the solutions as well. I want to now, I think we have, I'm seeing the chat messages. I think our other panelist, Deysi, is not able to join via video, but if I'm understanding correctly, Michelle, she will be able to join via audio. And
yeah, so she's here via audio. Unfortunately, the translation is only available on computer audio, not phone call. So maybe if you can ask her the question in Spanish, then she'll be able to hear you.
Okay.
And understand your question.
Yeah. So, bienvenida Deysi, creo que está con nosotros vía teléfono y nomás ahora estamos haciendo las presentaciones. Si se puede, por favor, presentar. Y estamos pidiendo que describan algunos de los cambios principales que han visto en sus trabajos o algunas de las preocupaciones principales que tienen como trabajadoras en ese sector de la comida rápida. Si puede, por favor, comentar en eso un poquito, comentar sobre eso.
She's currently muted. She'll need to unmute herself to answer.
Ok. Deysi, por favor, si se puede sacar del modo de silencio para que la podamos escuchar. Si aprieta en el teléfono, es el asterisco y el número 6, asterisk 6 on the phone. Si aprieta el asterisco y el número 6 en su teléfono. I can't see her to sort of, I don't know if as a host can unmute, or should we come back to Deysi in a sec? We really...
We'll continue to try and troubleshoot. Sorry about that.
No, I really hope she has a chance to participate because, yeah, it would be really interesting to hear from her as well. Dr. Gould-Werth, I know that you laid out some of the big issues, and I don't know if you want, before we move into solutions, is there anything more that you wanted to name in terms of the context of the challenges or main issues that workers are facing?
I just agree with you that it's, you can show a chart, but I think hearing people's real experiences is what's really powerful. And I just wanted to kind of name things that, just a couple quick things. In what Nancy was saying, one thing that really struck me is when she said, like, this is work that is skilled, right? And so I was talking about this idea that some scholars have that we need to train people and give them skills to do this work. And I heard Nancy kind of pushing back against that and saying that we are already skilled. So I thought that was really interesting. And then, you know, both Nancy and Nicole were talking really about employment relationships that are different than what a lot of our labor regulations were designed to do. So this traditional employer and employee relationship, if you are a day laborer and your employer is changing from day to day, if you're a domestic worker, you're being paid off the books, or if you're a rideshare driver and you're being classified as an independent contractor and being your boss is mediated through an app, all of this is kind of speaking to that idea of the fissured workplace. And I think it's also just really interesting to think, like, in my mind, I was going through like, okay, are these service sector, like, right, we're in transportation, how would these be classified in our survey? But I think what's really important from what we heard about Deysi's bio, and then from what Nancy was talking about, and what Nicole was, that all these workers are providing services. They're interfacing with actual individuals in the economy, not necessarily producing goods. So those were connections I saw to some of the broader trends.
Great, thank you. Yeah, and I know, Nancy and Nicole, that you've been at the forefront of some of the advocacy and sort of the pushing for solutions to address some of these at different levels. Like Nancy, you mentioned some of the worker training and some of just the individual capacity building for them to be able to negotiate with their employer, as well as the broader advocacy, as well as Nicole, you calling out the studies that you have been doing to sort of push for that change in policy. And I wanted to just open it up now to talk a little bit about what kind of solutions have you been both engaged in or that you're feeling like people need to start engaging in. And we do have a couple questions that I wanted to add to the context as you think about this, because I think they are both touch on potential targets to engage in solutions. One, with respect to domestic workers, is how do you organize employers, or is there an effort to engage employers of domestic workers around what the expectations would be for them to provide a safe job? And then also in terms of the rideshare, an effort to educate or engage consumers so that they're also aware of how their choices are impacting whether workers get better jobs or not. So maybe we'll go back again in circle, and we'll start with Nancy, just to name a couple of the ways that you're, advocating for change, or that you have, gotten the results that you want to advance on this, as well as touching on the role of employers.
Sure, thanks. Yeah, there's so many connecting parts across our industries, because misclassification is also something in day labor and domestic work. But yeah, in terms of organizing around solutions or trying to push, I think one of the strategies is trying to also expose some of the gaps. With us participating, we are part of the California Domestic Worker Coalition, which is a statewide coalition made up of CBOs that are led by domestic workers themselves. So we are one of those organizations, and we have led much of the legislation around trying to really shift and change the domestic work industry. A few years ago, one of those pushes was making sure that personal attendants, caregivers were guaranteed overtime. Many people don't know, but they actually were not guaranteed that by the law. We help push for that, and that's a reality now. The enforcement piece is still difficult. Domestic workers are still underpaid and not given all of their benefits. Even though in the books, domestic workers technically are covered by most labor protections, overtime, sick pay, vacation, it doesn't actually happen for many workers. And so, on the individual, on the smaller level, we are doing a lot of education to make sure that both workers and employers are aware of what those rights are. And the Domestic Worker Coalition is also part of the California statewide domestic worker education and outreach program called DWAP, which funds CBOs like IDEPSCA and other organizations across the state to create materials and disseminate them across, workers and employers. One of those organizations is also Hand in Hand, which is the domestic work employer network, and they directly organize with domestic work employers. And, alongside with them, for example, IDEPSCA has done health and safety trainings, webinars for employers. And I know that with other organizations too, they have done several workshops for employers on what are, the basic protections. I believe they even have several guides on their website on how an employer can kind of walk through with their employee about what are the different rights that a worker has. Because often, and this is true even when an employer wants to be a good employer, there's not a lot of information easily available for domestic work employers, or at least not like 10, 20 years ago. But that is shifting thanks to, organizations like Hand in Hand that are creating this alongside workers and worker organizations. So there's a real effort. I hope y'all can check it out, Hand in Hand. They're a really great organization. Aside from that, I think, I was mentioning the health and safety committees. I had also mentioned the voluntary guidelines that were created, with Kalosha, I guess, but it was a lot of advocates that were and experts that were part of the advisory committee that was part of creating that. I think, a challenge that we have is that their voluntary guidelines, we have still yet to remove the exclusion of domestic work from Kalosha protections. I think one of the things that we are trying our best to do on a statewide basis, we have an active campaign to really share the real stories of domestic workers and day laborers getting injured on the job. What do those injuries look like? What is the impact that it has? Again, fighting back on that idea that workers are just disposable and easily replaced. Just to get into a little technicality, there's no real definition in the law of what domestic work is, unfortunately. And that creates a lot of challenges for when we talk about health and safety. A lot of the different cases try to argue that domestic work is something that anyone can do. And that's not true. Caring for someone, tending to someone's home is a real skill, and our members show that. We have different trainings where workers that have been in the industry for years, share best tips on how to clean a home, on how to care for someone. It is not something that someone could just do. And I think for that reason, many workers too are empowered to, share those skills as well as sharing information about their rights. A lot of more recent migrants end up doing this work, and unfortunately, they are the ones that often, we've heard get paid as little as $5 an hour. That is still happening. And yeah, it obviously shouldn't happen, but it does happen all the time, unfortunately. So yeah, I think the issues of health and safety, the larger issues of wage theft, and making sure that workers and employers know that these workers, regardless of their immigration status, have these rights, at least some of those on the books, let's say.
So Nicole, back to you around sort of what some of the key solutions are or strategies that you're pursuing. And again, just referencing the question we have in the Q&A around the role of educating consumers to join in the advocacy for workers.
So I really I appreciate all the things you're saying, Nancy, because that's one of the things that we talk about all the time, is that, you know, domestic workers and farm workers have been left out of the whole equation, and it's part of the structural racism of our country to leave those out. And now there's this, you know, huge effort to leave gig workers out, and you know, but it's going to sneak up that chart that Dr. Gould-Werth showed, because you know, it's not just farm work. It's not just driving. It's going to hit every industry. Right now, we've even seen, you know, this kind of deployment by app happen in healthcare. Right now, do nurses have rights? Do CMAs have rights? You know, all the different positions within healthcare system. So just to say that, I think it's hugely connected, and we do talk about that, and we talk about when they take your rights away, when do you get them back? And, you know, I know that's what, you know, your industry is really struggling with, Nancy. How do we get these rights? You know, we're just working our way up to basic employment rights, you know? So that said, thinking about the hills that Uber wants to die on, and I say Uber is really the global leader in this work, and the things that we see happening in the United States are happening literally all over the world. You know, we're seeing, you know, I mean, think about all the different transportation options that you have in cities like Mumbai, right? Now there's this huge, you know, Uber fleet that sends all its capital back to San Francisco, and it goes out of that economy, plus the work that Uber is doing all over the world to codify misclassification. It's really a big deal. It's huge. So the hills they want to die on are misclassification, and they don't want anybody to have the right to you know, do class action suits. So it's arbitration mandated. And the other thing they want to do is co-opt organizations that are seen as worker allies. And, you know, we see that with the Independent Drivers Guild, which was started by Uber money and still represents itself as a union when it's receiving funds from Uber and Lyft to pretend to be the union and they're not working for the rights. And I think so as workers, you know, in California, we're really looking at is, you know, we're keeping our fingers crossed. In this month, the Supreme Court of California will hear the case against Prop 22 and will decide whether or not Prop 22 can stand in our state. I mean, how do you get out from under a law that basically takes this whole workforce's rights away and doesn't give any access to any other kind of, you know, regulation? We have to get out from under that law. So if they do overturn Prop 22, we're in a very good position to do something simple and effective. You know, our work is not different than other workers' work, right? But what's difficult is how do we enforce, you know, the law? It's interesting. Drivers have always gotten unemployment insurance until Prop 22. Sometimes you had to work your way through frontline unemployment office workers to like say, no, actually, just because Uber isn't putting into the account, I actually am eligible. But people have always had eligibility on that. They've always had, you know, Cal OSHA protections. They've always had all these things, and the state can give those things. The state's in control of giving those benefits. But what the only way that the state has to enforce pay under current current setup would be what we did is we filed more than 5,000 of us filed wage claims in early 2020. And, you know, I was sort of blown away. We took the total from the 5,000 people who filed wage claims, and it was $1.3 billion that was owed to these workers. And it's a billion with a B. And, half of that is damages, but the other half is straight pay that was taken out of our pockets and the expenses that we paid out of our own pockets. So, I mean, it's huge. But what can the state do to enforce that? Well, the Labor Commission did the strongest action they could do. They closed all the individual claims and is now, suing Lyft and Uber on behalf of all drivers. We had 3 cities and the state attorney general join in the same kind of suit. So we have we have the biggest attorneys in California fighting this, and 4 years later, none of us have a penny. None of us, right? And they're taking they're saying that the state must abide by mandated arbitration, so they can't take a group. This is totally specious, but it's holding up the case. And this is money that makes the difference between somebody being able to continue work, to continue to have a home, to continue to put food on the table for their kids. This is money that poor people are owed, right? While the company brags about making profits. So what do? What's the simple solution? We actually have the law in place, but we need a layer of regulation that allows gig workers to work as gig workers. And that is just to regulate the rates, to say that you can't go below, say, $1.75 per mile, 60 cents per minute, which is very normal kind of taxi industry, language. You don't need anything complex. We as drivers are in a hugely diverse group of people with huge skill sets. I totally identify with what Nancy's saying about the workforce, right? We're a self-run organization that is fighting this fight on volunteer people, right? I'm a volunteer. We have 2 staff people, so we can build this. We can build real power. Protecting this workforce's ability to actually shift power and become powerful organizations in the labor movement is actually part of the battle as well. If we don't build real power in, a workforce of people that are really from a lot of other industries, me from healthcare, right? like this is a really important thing, and we need to give agency to folks in this industry. So we say regulation and give us the ability, under labor rights, to build our own unions and fight the fight. But if we can get pay regulated but based on a rate card, and the reason a rate card works better than hourly is because we as drivers run multiple apps, right? I'll run Uber at the same time I'm running Lyft, and I might have DoorDash on the side. How do we do an hourly wage on that? It's hard to figure out. But when I take an assignment, my per hour, per mile, per minute rate has to cover the little bit of wait time that we have, our expenses, and that kind of thing. And that's what we believe needs to happen, and that's what we're working towards. And we think it's simple. There's a lot of complex, ideas out there. It's just simple. Build wage regulation on top of labor rights. It's all that needs to happen. And don't give away anything. Not until we've had a real fight do we trade when we're at a position of power. So I want to answer the questions really quick. I love the question about organizing and educating consumers. It's a huge vulnerability to the companies. When you have just paid $100 for a ride and you find out that your driver only earned $25, it pretty much freaks people out. They just can't believe it, right? There's been a lot of drivers always think it's great to organize the customers. We don't always feel comfortable to it. It could be the wrong customer. But if there's anybody who who wants to help build a committee, we'll be happily able to build we would love to work with a customer passenger advocacy group, and I think we could do beautiful things together.
Well, I'm gonna, before you go into the next question, and I know that there's so many different levels, and I'm just getting the time reminder, so
Okay.
hopefully we'll be able to come back to that, or if you might, I know there's a question about can AI be moral tools for good or bad, which is there's several interesting questions on the sheet, but thank you so much for laying out what you're calling also like a simple solution in regulation, but also I think both you and Nancy have really talked about the important role of workers in recognizing their value and being really part of the organizing and forefront of the advocacy. And I want to since Deysi now is with us, give her some space to share a little bit about her experience with fast food industry. But thank you both so much so far. Deysi, or si nos escucha, quisiéramos que se presente y nos cuente un poquito de su experiencia en el McDonald's, las preocupaciones que ha visto ahí y también cómo están abogando con la nueva unión para lograr mejores condiciones de trabajo.
Buenos días, ¿sí me logran escuchar?
Sí, perfecto.
I'm
sorry I'm so late.
Estuve batallando. Buenos días, mi nombre es Deysi.
Good morning, my name is Deysi Gomez. I'm working for McDonald's and also worked in Carl's Jr.
Pues trabajé en Carlos Jr., ¿verdad? Bueno, pues entonces, yo emigré.
So I immigrated about 3 years to this country.
Para mí ha sido una
For me, it's been
muy conmovedora,
a very hard experience coming here, since my first work was always in the fast food industry, as I mentioned, McDonald's and Carl's Jr. So in some occasions,
pues la situación, ¿verdad?, que se nos ha dado hasta el
the
momento,
situation that we have is a little complex, a little difficult for us as immigrants.
Pues nosotros
As
sabemos bien, ¿verdad?,
we
que
know
somos
that
una familia,
we have
nosotros, pues,
a family that we need to
apoyarlos, porque
support
ellos se
because
quedaron en
they
este
are
país,
still in
porque
our
ellos, pues,
countries,
está bajo
and
nuestra
they are under
responsabilidad.
our
Tengo una
financial
nena de
responsibility. I
11
have a
años,
9-year-old girl,
y realmente,
and
pues llegar a este
coming
país
to
es
this
totalmente
country is
diferente,
completely
totalmente
different.
diferente, donde uno tiene que,
Different
pues, prácticamente,
because we have to
acoplarse al ritmo de trabajo, al ritmo de vida.
change to the rhythm of
Y
life
pues
and
a través
work
de
of this
todo
country.
ello,
And through all
cuando
that,
yo entré a
when I
McDonald's,
got
cuando yo
into
entré a Carlos
McDonald's and
Jr.,
Carl's
nunca
Jr.,
pensé
I
que las cosas
never thought that
iban a cambiar
things
para
would
mí, ¿verdad?
change for
Porque todo
me
es diferente.
because everything is so different.
Pues aparentemente, el tiempo para acá hubo una
But apparently
oportunidad
there
que,
was an opportunity
en Carlos Jr. me hicieron trabajar,
that
¿verdad? Lastimosamente, digo, puedo decir en esta
Carl
manera,
Jr. made me work, unfortunately,
trabajando, ¿verdad?, en la oscuridad,
in
la luz
darkness.
frecuencia
There was a
se fue la
blackout,
luz eléctrica, y me
and
estaban
they were
obligando, porque yo
forcing
soy
me,
la
because I am a
supervisora,
supervisor or was a
obligándome a que
supervisor,
yo trabajara
to work
nomás con una linterna del teléfono
with
celular, ¿me
my cell
entiendes?
phone flashlight. Can you
Y
imagine?
realmente yo tenía a cargo a otra
And I
señora
had
de la
someone
cocina,
else
del área
in
de
charge
cocina,
who was working the
y pues
kitchen,
prácticamente para mí
and
era un peligro.
practically that was so
Eso
dangerous.
era un
It was
peligro y
dangerous,
siempre va a
and
ser un
it'll
peligro
always be
trabajar de esa
dangerous
manera.
working under those
Cuando yo
circumstances.
llamo a mi store
When
manager,
I call the
mi
store
persona encargada,
manager,
cuando
the
yo
person in
llamo
charge of
a
me,
mis
my
supervisores más
supervisors,
grandes de arriba, me
the
dicen,
top
no, tú tienes
people,
que
they said,
trabajar
nope,
así,
you have to work that
sacarme lo
way.
que
You
es,
have to do the
porque
job,
sacarme lo
because
que
you
es, o
have
sea,
to
lo que ellos
do
estaban viendo era por
what
mi
you have to
bienestar
do. So they were looking after the income
y no
of the
por
company,
nosotros,
not
¿verdad?
for the
Y para mí
employees. And for
eso es
me,
algo muy, muy
that was a
lamentable,
very
¿verdad?
sad
Con esta
experience,
situación que hemos vivido dentro de la industria de la comida
especially because this is
rápida. Esa
common
es una de
in
las
the food
cosas que
industry.
yo siempre
This is
he
one of the things that
hablado
I've
y
always
siempre he
spoken
dicho,
about,
y es
that
por
I've
eso,
said.
es por eso que yo me he ido a huelga,
This is
es por eso
why
que
I go
yo
on strike.
he
This is
tratado de hacer las
why
cosas bien. Yo no conocía mis
I do
derechos.
these things, because I didn't know my
Definitivamente yo no
rights.
las
I
conocía
definitely
cuando yo
did
llegué a este
not know
país.
them when I got here.
Pero algo que
But
cambió mi
something that
vida
changed
fue
my
hace
life
prácticamente
was
un año.
about a year ago,
Encontré a una
I
muchacha en
found
la calle,
someone in the
así
street
de la nada,
out of
porque
nowhere
yo me sentía
because I was so
frustrada, yo me
frustrated.
sentía que no podía
I
yo
felt that I
prácticamente
could barely
continuar así porque
continue
yo
this
sabía
way
que era las personas que estaban a mi
because I
cargo
knew that the people that were in charge of
peligros
me
ahí. Prácticamente yo trabajaba también
were
los días de noche, yo
working
trabajaba,
hard
yo
also,
amanecía con
and
otras
I was
personas, con
working
una
nights.
mujer, no era un hombre, es
I
mujer,
would spend all night with another woman. Imagine in a fast food alone in the middle of the night, you're all alone. There aren't a lot of people around. Everything is empty. A lot of drug addicts, a lot of dangerous people for us as women working alone. But we were forced to work that way.
También ocurre pues que en McDonald's,
And also
¿verdad?
in
Una de las
McDonald's,
cosas de las cuales hasta el momento he estado
one of the
batallando,
things that I've been
pues,
dealing with
siempre voy a
and
batallar,
fighting against
porque también
is
ahí existen las injusticias,
the injustice,
existe la
the discrimination,
existe también lo que es el
and
racismo.
racism.
Estamos luchando
We're
prácticamente
fighting
con ese tipo
with
de gerencias. Estamos
with these
tratando
things. We're
de luchar
trying
con
to
que el panorama de nuestro
change
trabajo
our
que sea un lugar seguro, que sea un lugar
change
adecuado a
our
nosotros como trabajadores,
industry
nos están tratando mal.
so that we are treated justly because we're not being treated fair.
Días atrás,
A few days back,
tenemos otra
we
gerente
have another
nos
manager.
humilladas, nos hace
She
sentir como que
humiliates
no
us. She makes us
valiéramos
feel like we're
porque,
worthless.
por el simple hecho de
That
no saber inglés,
the mere
nos
fact that we don't
discriminan
speak
de tal
English, she
forma.
discriminates against us.
Quieren la comida a 1000 por hora y no podemos hacer eso porque aunque nosotros tratemos de sacarle la comida
They
de
want us
todo
to
por hacer
make the
lo
food
imposible
so fast
posible de
within
darles
the
a
hour.
ellos no
And
estar
even if
conformes,
we
no estar
do
contentos,
the
no estar alegres
impossible
porque nosotros les
to
estamos haciendo
get that goal
trabajo.
or to
Mas, sin embargo, ¿verdad? Siempre
do it the
estamos
way they want,
presionados
they're never
y
happy. They're
también
always pressuring us.
me pongo
And
a
I
pensar
think,
cómo es ese tipo de situaciones de
how
que
is this
están
situation
aplicando represalias
when
por
they
el simple hecho de conocer nuestros
when
derechos?
if we know our rights and we
Yo me pongo
speak
a
up,
pensar cómo es
they
posible que
take it
cada
against
día,
us, they
lunes,
punish
me iban
us.
a dar un
On
warning
Monday, they
por
were going
sacar
to
mi
give me a
trabajo, por hacer mi
warning,
trabajo.
even though I had done my work.
Yo ya no sé si
I
estoy
don't
segura
know
dentro
whether
de esa
I'm
industria de comida rápida.
secure
Si
within this industry
realmente
and my job,
ellos valoran
if
mi
they
trabajo, porque
value
yo
my
veo
work,
ahora por
because I
cualquier
see
cosa, o
that
sea,
for
los
any
que me
little
mandan son
thing,
fáciles.
they will write me up. I'm
Intento
a
fallar en
human,
cualquier
I can
momento, pero
fail,
ellos no lo comprenden
but
de
they
esa
don't see
manera
it
y
that
ellos
way.
quieren ver dónde nosotros
They are
fallamos
always
para
looking
que
to
ellos vengan y
see
nos puedan
where we
despedir. Eso es
fail,
lo que ellos
to
quieren,
come and
desaparecerme de ese
then
lugar, sacarme de ese lugar para
fire
que no
us from the
siga
job
hablándole a mis
so that I
compañeros, para que
don't
no
speak up
siga
to my coworkers and tell them
abriéndole
about
los
the
ojos
laws
a
and
ellos,
opening their
porque
eyes to what
es
reality is.
lamentable,
And it's unfortunate.
la
This
situación.
situation is really
Conozco
unfortunate
compañeros
that
que
some
conocen sus derechos,
people there, coworkers,
pero
do know their
no quieren.
rights,
Ellos me
but they
dicen
don't
a mí, yo
want
no
to
quiero
deal with it. They
problemas,
say, I
yo no
don't want
quiero
problems.
faltarles al
I don't
respeto a
want
mis
to
jefes.
disrespect. They see
¿Dónde
it
voy a
as
buscar otro
disrespecting.
trabajo? ¿A
Where
dónde
am I
me
going
voy
to
a ir?
find another job?
Si
Where
yo
am
voy
I
a dar
going
a
to
conocer mis
go
derechos,
if I
ese es el
talk
miedo
up
que
and
ellos
I
viven.
state
Es
my
el
rights?
miedo
That's the
que
fear.
ellos están viendo las
And
represalias
they're
que están haciendo
seeing
contra ellos.
that they
Dicen,
will
para estar así
punish
como tú
us
estás,
when we speak
yo
up
no quiero nada.
and try to
Pero yo les
enforce
digo,
our rights. And I tell them,
no,
you have to do it.
hagan lo posible
You
para que
have to
ustedes
do it
puedan
so
estar
that you
bien.
can
Porque
be
yo
better.
ahora he ido a huelga,
I go to strikes.
le he hablado, les he incitado,
I
he
have
hablado
told
con
them,
relación a los
uh,
políticos para
I
que vean estos
remind
casos que
them that there
nosotros
are
estamos
politicians that can help us, that
trabajadores.
we can do something to
Deysi, quiero
better
comentar,
this.
perdón,
Daisy,
quiero
I
comentar que hay un
want to mention that there's a comment in the
quizás
chat from Maria Vasquez in LA. She says in McDonald's and fast food, we see that some workers get an increase in pay, but then they start cutting back hours. A lot of people are elderly and they feel like they can't work as much, and they give those hours to younger people so that they cut back the hours so that they don't earn as much. And you're talking about fear. and how they instigate us. I want to ask you if you can talk a bit about your participation with the union and what changes have occurred for you. What are you fighting for? What do you want to get? Right now, where I'm working currently, I've seen a change during the strikes that we've had and all our dealings with the politician. And now I feel secure. And why do I feel secure? Because we have a syndicate. And that is what is giving us a backbone. And I tell my coworkers, if you unite, you will belong to a syndicate and you will be strong. So the problem in a certain way in the controversy is, and they ask this a lot about the hours and so forth, we have obtained a change because we are respected. Now they can't talk down to us. They can't be aggressive with racism, discrimination. They can't speak racism to us. And they've been pushing us around. So we have gained a good change. My coworkers who have gone with me to the strikes and belong to the syndicate, wow, we feel empowered. We feel that we know our rights. We say, this is enough. You can't yell at me. You can't do this to me. You can't treat me this way. And we can defend ourselves because whatever they do, let's say they give us a warning. Why the warning? What did I do to earn this warning? And then they think about it twice. So that's what we have gained.
Entonces, en ese momento ellos reaccionan, ¿verdad? Es el logro que hemos tenido hasta el momento, pues, con relación a esto. Sí, me sorprende mucho cómo
I'm surprised how this union has actually saved our lives because we feel more secure, although we're still living in some situations, but it's a step. Thank you, Deysi.
Entonces, estamos ya terminando el panel y realmente apreciamos mucho que ha venido a compartir sus experiencias. Y quisiera nomás
If someone wants to
unos minutitos, si alguien quiere comentar
comment, and I'm sorry, doctor, that we couldn't get back to you, Gould-Werth, if there is a conclusion or a call to action. 1 minute for each one.
Alguna conclusión o una llamada a acción a la conferencia. So, un minutito cada una. How's that? Like 1 minute for a final word or call to action or something that you hope people pay attention to or pursue. Nancy?
Oh boy. Okay.
You may have 2 minutes, actually. I think we're give until 10:50. Go ahead.
Okay. Sure. I'll say one of our slogans of the domestic worker movement is that domestic work makes all other work possible. So just a reminder to all of us. And I think this is a great conversation because we can see, right, all the connections between our industries and that we're fighting the good fight. And to me, it doesn't sound that we're saying anything that conflicts between our industries, which is exciting. We say in many ways, right, that domestic workers are the original gig workers also. And so it's really nice that in this panel, I feel like we're all talking about similar injustices, but also the fact that, you know, organizing saves lives. Organizing is really what is going to make all these changes possible. And it's workers themselves that are leading it. And so just really honored to be here with everybody else that's part of the good fight.
Thank you, Nancy. Nicole?
I hope everybody can, you know, who's in California can really help support our fight for no-nonsense regulation of pay, and light the candles and whatever else works to get judges to make the right decisions. And, you know, we have to continue this fight. It's a global fight. And, you know, I just am very honored to be here with everybody because I think, you know, we're making the connections about how it's all of us and it's becoming more and more of us. I mean, gig workers are kind of the people that have been thrown out of the rest of the economy, you know, whether we have jobs, other jobs or not. It's a place, I mean, we just saw it like when everybody was on strike this summer, like all the numbers of drivers went up. When there's been big layoffs at different industries, all the numbers go up. And it is, you know, it's a safety net that is really a trap, and we have to fix it so that it doesn't invade all of our other industries.
Thank you, Nicole. Dr. Gould-Werth, do you want to add any comments or a brief response to what you've heard?
Yeah, I'll just really quickly say that some of the remarks that Deysi was making reminded me of kind of an important dimension of job quality that I think wasn't present in my talk, which is the experience of feeling respect on the job. And I think Nancy and Nicole's remarks kind of also underscored that. And then in Nicole and Deysi's remarks, also the feeling of insecurity, of not being sure if you'll have a job tomorrow. Also, Nancy, I think that applies to the folks that you work with, and that's another important dimension of job quality that has received academic attention as important. And then I think just really quickly, the thing that I'll say last is, you know, during my remarks, I talked about worker voice and showed that chart of how we've really seen a drop off in private sector union density, and that people in this panel would be ones to really speak to what's going on in response to that. And I think that all of your work speaks to worker power, worker voice, and worker organizing outside of the traditional framework. And so it's captivating and interesting and important to hear.
Thank you. Y Deysi, a usted le doy la última palabra, un par de minutos para nomás recalcar un punto principal de lo que quiere que la audiencia tenga en mente.
Sí, pues sí, prácticamente que describirles de nuevo, ¿verdad? Los obstáculos más importantes que enfrentamos como trabajadores y poder lograr cambios, ¿verdad? Esa es una de las cosas que también nosotros queremos recalcar como trabajadores. Queremos decir también que tenemos los obstáculos, tenemos que enfrentar, ¿verdad? Y tener cambios a través de esos obstáculos, ¿verdad? ¿Y qué podemos hacer en cuestiones importantes, ¿verdad? Para poder abordar el tema. Pues que ya tenemos el primer año de sindicato y eso es lo que ya hemos logrado. Y también quisiera comentarles, ¿verdad? Con relación a lo que es nuestros, a nivel estatal, ¿verdad? Que tengamos sueldos justos, horarios justos, que tengamos condiciones justas también. Con relación a los
just conditions regarding those salaries, you get those $20 that are a good step forward, and keep moving that forward so that the syndicate can grow. It's something important.
Industria, ¿verdad? De comida rápida,
for the fast food industry, and just keep moving forward and getting those annual increases of 3.5. We'd like to see that, and we have a lot of goals that we want to meet. On schedules, we want to know that we have enough working hours to be able to support our families, because they're cutting hours as they raise the salary, and then they are hiring new people, but they're not giving the old employees 40 hours work. So then we can't support our families. It's a goal that we want to have on a state level. And I'd like us to investigate following, that someone can go directly and see what's going on in the fast food industry, because we can explain all these things, but we need that support from someone capable of investigating and seeing, observing what is going on with us. Because oftentimes they may believe us or they may not, but in most cases, we've been victims. We're vulnerable.
Deysi, me va a perdonar, pero creo que la vamos a tener que terminar ahí por hoy día, pero realmente aprecio mucho.
Deysi, we appreciate your time, and of course this collaborating with investigators and being strong and being courageous for the employees is very important. Thank you so much for being here. To all the panelists.
Thank you to all the panel members for joining us today and really helping. I mean, there's so many complex issues. Hay asuntos tan complicados que están abarcando asuntos tan complicados, pero apreciamos mucho su participación. Deysi, hay un comentario para usted.
Deysi, there's a comment for you. Thank you for your history. You're so brave.
And with that, I know you have all put links, several links in the chat to learn more about your work, and appreciate that very much. I'm turning it back to you, Christina.
Thank you so much. It's obvious why we have much to do and how important it is to hear your voices. We get a rare opportunity to have your presentations with an audience like this. So muchas gracias. And with that, we will take a 10-minute break. We should be back with our next presentation by Dr. Boren. And in about 10 minutes, so about 2 minutes after 11 Pacific, we will resume. Thank you very much.